of teacher training. Um, Now, okay, in the time of the Buddha, most of the students of the Buddha were lay people. That's the word we use, it's a Catholic word. They called them generally householders. And you could see the distinction between people because they didn't really have the kind of jobs, an hourly wage or a weekly wage or anything like that in that time. So basically, you could divide them between those who held property and those who didn't. And if a guy holds property from his heritage or his family, he owns property, then he probably employs people to do the things around the house. Okay, that's his livelihood, but his land supports a lot of people. And so, in the time of the Buddha, with that, it was normally the employees who would go and join the Buddha in the Sangha, but that those in the monkhood, depended upon the the goodwill of the householders in the community. That if an employee quit his job to go become a monk and the employer didn't like it, that's not a cool situation to have. That in fact, there's a particular sutta about it. It's number 2 in the Dinga Nikaya, where the history is that this young king, who was a prince, killed his father, the king, rose to the level of king, and that the Buddha was a good friend of King Bimbisara. So when his son killed him, he eventually comes to talk about the Buddha, and one of the things that the Buddha was mentioning is that if you had a servant who quit your house and came to become a monk, how would you feel about it? And he says, oh, yeah, I would really like that. So that was the attitude back then. The attitude that we have from employers nowadays is that they don't like it when people quit their jobs and go have fun. They want them to work. And so that's a kind of a difference in the mentality. But in the time of the Buddha, most of the people who followed the Buddha, they talked about it like that. There's a lot of sutras where they say, may I be a lay follower of the Buddha for my whole life. Um, so, in that regard, there was also some famous teachers who were lay people. Two in particular. One of them was known to be so good, and that not only that, but because he was a layman, he would go out and in groups of lay people, he would teach. And he could teach the Dhamma generally better than the monks could. And so he was well known for that. But one of the qualities that we can count on is that that there are some things that are required to become a teacher, and that these are things that can be seen by more senior teachers. This is not something that someone comes up with by themselves because of our delusion. An example, you know that you're just average psychologists, and most of the people on the street can see another person in certain kinds of bad behavior, but if you ask them about it, they will deny it. Oh, I'm not angry. Oh, I'm okay. And so when a teacher has that, they're not able to see their own faults. They need to be around mirrors, around nobles, around others who can see this stuff and work with them in a kind hearted way to be able to get them to see it. Um, I have heard this, by the way, in psychology as a side point, that if a psychiatrist or a psychotherapist tells their client what's wrong with them, the client will either say, yes, that's exactly what it is, thank you very much, goodbye, and he never comes back. But mostly what happens is that when the psychiatrist or psychotherapist tells the guy what's wrong with him, he'll deny it, get angry, and quit therapy. So in both regards, the psychotherapist is going to lose or is in danger of losing a client by telling them what's wrong with them. We have to fix it up so that the client can see it for themselves. And sometimes they can and sometimes they can't. So getting back to that teacher training then is that the right way to get trained is by those who have been trained as teachers in the Dhamma. This is where the nobles come in, and the nobles, like the typical situation would be that a guy who really cares about the Dhamma, he goes through our help to find a wat to live in. He lives in that wat for a while and gets a kind of education that he needs somehow. Um, the example on the side with Eric was as he says, I'm up here in Laos in this wilderness, and that um, I'm getting no challenges. And my response back to that is, oh, getting no challenges, that's quite a challenge for you, isn't it? Asking those questions. And that just did it for him. He recognized that he didn't like it because it wasn't busy enough. And when he came to understand that that was his challenge, was to be in an environment that's not busy. And so this is part of the training. I think that his teachers put him in that environment to kind of, give him a bath to get that busy out of him by giving him a place where there's no place to go and nothing to do. So at a wat in the U.S., what would typically happen is somebody goes, he gets familiar, he keeps going back and keeps making friends, keeps having good things happen. And eventually the abbot will say, well, why don't we start a meditation class in English? And so the new guy who was there, he's already kind of being trained by the abbot of the wat. He's being pushed into the teaching. He already cares a lot about the Dhamma. Well, now most of the guys that I know, they would jump at the chance of being able to teach the Dhamma and have a weekly meditation class. And so then the community can come in. And so it would be lay people teaching lay people under the umbrella of a wat or a senior abbot, and that this is the kind of thing that you would want to see at a university. You wouldn't want to see the teacher assistants or the instructors. That's the word I'm looking for. You wouldn't want to see an entire university full of instructors, and that's all you have. Oh no, you want some people who have already gotten their PhD, who have been in there for many years and have come to the level of emeritus. You want those old professors around, even though they're in let us say, a subject that is fast moving. Just because it's fast moving, that doesn't mean that much. For instance, computers. I was trained in the 1960s and 70s in computers, and all they have done is just pile software on top of what I already know. The foundation was already there. The foundation for electrical engineering. There's not much new happening in electrical engineering. There's not much new happening in computing and that kind of thing. In fact, there is not much new happening in psychology. But what you need is people who have been deep into it for a very, very long time. They've been immersed into it. It's become their life. And that someone doesn't get that life by signing on to, let us say, just the average guy on the internet goes to Stanford, MIT, and all of these other websites and takes all of these courses. Some of them will be for actual credit, but they're not really all that finished. It's only the didactic, it's only the classroom. And so even with the Dhamma, with teaching online, it's only that the teacher's training program is not actually training teachers. It's one teacher talking to other teachers, with a few of them getting a chance. What we're looking for here is a diversity of spreading it out to where one guy goes to this Watt, another guy goes to that Watt, another guy goes to that Watt. They don't even have to be at the level of moving in. Just being there um, will be enough for the ties to say, "Hey, this guy, let's start helping him to train to be a teacher." And not only that, but look at the benefit of the students that he will have. And so this is one of the aspects of the teacher training program, is to make sure that Western teachers who may never ordain will still get the benefit of the original Dhamma and the Sangha from the Buddha that's been passed down through this Sangha. This organization is quite marvelous. That the Buddha Sangha worldwide is the largest organization in the world. It's also one of the oldest. The only possibility would be the Jain, because the Buddha was part of the Jains before he joined or started the Sangha himself. So it's just about the oldest organization in the world. It's the largest organization in the world, that is in fact so large that it generally, if you added all the soldiers in uniform together from all the armies in the world, it still wouldn't be up to the level of how many people you have ordained as Buddhist monks and nuns. Isn't that amazing? And that system has been going all of this time, but it hasn't gotten to the West very well. Why? Because it got to the West by people going over, putting their toe into the Dhamma, finding out how sweet it is, and then coming back and selling toes. They didn't actually jump in and immerse. The several that I know of, for instance, were only in Burma and Thailand for about a year or so. They haven't put it in like Ajahn Dhammavitu is English, but he's been ordained since 1993, which now means that he's been a monk for 30 years. He's the guy, he's the kind of guy that you want to go to. Or Ajahn Amaro, Ajahn Pasanto, Ajahn Samedo. The problem with that is that there are so few Western monks who have really put the time in and gotten the good education. And so we're still relying upon the Thai. And yet, what happens with the Westerner is that when he gets involved with Buddhism, he goes online, he gets some information, maybe he goes on to Reddit, maybe he reads a book, or maybe takes a retreat. And when he goes to the retreat, he's not really close friends and familiar with the teacher before he goes. He doesn't spend much time with the teacher on the retreat. And when the retreat's over, the business deal is done, and off he goes, maybe to do another retreat at another time. To where what we're looking for is the building up of close friendships, long-lasting, long-term friendships, so that we begin to develop that feeling of at home, with being nurtured, belonging to something that is bigger than we are, that we've got friends and that we can rely upon them, which in general gives us a good feeling of safety. It's very hard to generate that feeling of safety and loving kindness within when you're living in a world that's unsafe and not kind. And so we need to live in an environment that's safe and kind. Women, by the way, just in our society, have more availability of safe and kind situations than men do. Generally, the men live in a dog-eat-dog world. That's why so many men really get interested in the Dhamma. Hey, I want out of that rat race that men have created for themselves. And so that's why there's so many more men into the Dhamma, is because they've got, as I said before, that you both like so much, is that men are really more screwed up than women are. And so they're the ones who need the Dhamma the most. but there have been some women who have been magnificent. Some stars are out there. Dhammadina in the time of the Buddha, but I know a modern day Dhammadina. Very good friend of mine. High quality nun. Many, many nuns. Hundreds of them, but only hundreds. Not tens of thousands. And we need tens of thousands of women who are very sharp on the Dhamma to handle the mass hordes that we have coming, because with AI and robotics and all of the problems of global warming and 10,000 other things, humanity is going to be going through some changes that have to do with a whole lot of millions of people having more time on their hands than they did before. Reduced working hours and loss of jobs, and all of this is going to be coming soon enough. That in fact, the trucking industry is doomed. When self-driving comes to the trucking industry, there's not going to be any more truckers. Wouldn't it be marvelous if all those truckers would stop at the Watt and stay for a couple of decades? That would be the good thing. But those truckers are going to not do that because they don't have a clue about the fact that it's available. This is what we're trying to promote, is that there are alternatives to what's going to happen when people don't know what to do anymore. Because we have been living under the precept of you don't work, you don't eat. And that's also you don't work, you don't eat is the problem with Western Buddhism. That many times that I have heard people say, well, a Dhamma teacher's got to eat too. And my answer to that is, yes, a Dhamma teacher does need to eat. And when he needs to eat while he's selling when he's teaching the Dhamma, he's going to be selling it in the sense of I need to eat, rather than selling it in the sense of it's freely available. And so we need to help them merge the Asian community with the Western community, so that the Asian community can help create this sense of well-being and cared for, so that we can begin through donations to support these teachers, to get them up on their feet. Now, there's a sister organization that we have called the Open Dhamma Foundation, and what they do is that they raise money to pay for people to go to retreats. And what that means, paying for the transportation as well as the retreat fees. But that's looking at it from backwards from the way that we're looking at it. Instead of supporting the students to pay the teachers, what we're looking for is to support the teachers so that they can teach the students without fear of not eating. And they can do that. In fact, we can do it with both the ordained and the household or the lay people. But with the Sangha, we've got that guaranteed. That's locked up. The food issue is a done deal in the Buddha Sangha. No problems. The problem would be with the Westerners thinking that how can we do that? Well, we can start an organization to where the Westerners who are, let us say, dedicated teachers can find support. We can find housing for them. Just like a preacher will live in the parsonage of the church. Well, we can find ways of getting houses. We can find ways of getting food. We can find ways of doing things with donations. And sometimes we get so good at it that the donations would be amazingly greater than the buy fee or the pay for it. Look at televangelists, for instance. The ones who get wealthy do so out of donations. Now, they manipulate a little bit to get those donations.
Mm-hmm.
But if we don't manipulate, we can still support a huge number of people because of the generosity and kind-heartedness that's available. That humanity is generous. We are kind-hearted. We do donate. But
What if they give?
when we pay money for something, when we think that the money is all there is to it, and it becomes a business deal, and I got what I paid for, but when we do it with outpouring of generosity, then people will, like one guy who's got some money, rather than ordaining himself, he would like to support 10, 20 different teachers so that they can teach the Dhamma. So this is the kind of organization that we're trying to start, is to connect people together so that we can support people getting into the Wat, either moving into the Wat, ordaining in the Wat, or just hanging around the Wat on the weekends. That's enough. That in fact we could do it that way, that the guy can just go and become friends with them. I've seen this several times already. Keyshawn has started to go to the Wat in Chicago, and after two or three times there, they says, "Oh, will you teach English to the monks?" Well, there you go. They're letting him right in. They're opening the door. If he's going to be teaching Dhamma or English to the monks this week, they'll be having him teach Dhamma next month, because they can see that he's already got so much Dhamma. Others, it may take a little bit longer, but every Wat that I know of, every abbot would really like to open a meditation class in English. Many of them already have, or most of them already have something in Thai, but to open it to English. And so people would go to the Wat. An individual guy would go to the Wat, go to the Wat, go to the Wat. They would set him then up as a teacher. Now he's in training, because the abbot is going to be keeping an eye on what's being said and how the students are behaving and what happens with that, and gently guiding him into becoming a good Dhamma teacher. This is the way that we get good Dhamma teachers, or those that have been trained by an old monk who they spend time with. One of the things that I would highly recommend, by the way, just on the side, is that to volunteer to drive the abbot to wherever he wants to go, because they are invited out to lunch sometimes and want to do some chanting or blessing a house or whatever like that. And while the driver is with the abbot, that's the time for Dhamma. And you've got the abbot all to yourself in that transportation time. So if he's got to travel an hour and a half round trip, that gives you an hour and a half with the abbot. So this is one of the things that I've picked up over the years as little tricks, so that you can get close to some really important people. Um, Not important, let us say, valuable friends, people to make friends with. So now we have other people who are coming to that class. So this would be the way of looking at it. You can also say that each one would be on kind of a journey from no Dhamma, getting into the Dhamma, and then becoming introduced to other people who are in the Dhamma. And that's when he begins to really grow. People who are out in the wilderness and the only thing that they have is books and online and um, an occasional retreat, they're not getting really immersed into the Dhamma. But when you have a friend who all he talks about is Dhamma, because that's the only thing he cares about, then the student is going to pick up a whole lot more. So as he begins to grow, he begins to recognize, oh, I would rather. They use words like go deep into the Dhamma. Basically, what we're actually meaning is spend more time in the Dhamma, so that the Dhamma becomes what we care about. And for that reason, we want to be around friends and people who care about the Dhamma. It would not be so valuable for a Dhamma guy who really is interested in the Dhamma to spend all his time with his best friend who is into football, because all he's going to hear is football, football, football. But if he goes to a friend who is in the Dhamma, then all he's going to hear from that friend is Dhamma, Dhamma, Dhamma. And that's the valuable part, is when we begin to get immersed in the Dhamma, in the sense of how much time do we spend thinking about it? How much time do we spend reading sutras and reflecting them? And then how much time do we spend talking about the Dhamma? Posting Dhamma on the various groups that are available so that we can actually find friends. Now, what happens in these various Buddhist groups is it winds up being a huge, huge number of uh, unknown Dhamma people who don't have much Dhamma. And they get in there and they start arguing with each other about it and whatnot like that. That what would be better to have is a group where they know that a well-known teacher is going to be looking in on this place and maybe making some changes here and there. So that would be the way beginning to manage it. It's sort of like that even at MIT, where the PhD candidates are working on, let us say, a robot. Occasionally, the old professor who is managing this place, he's going to walk in there and say, I see this and I see that, and what's going on over here? And he walks back out. And now the student's got a lot of work to do. And so when we recognize that a teacher's training program really is a training program, that you cannot watch videos of carpenters, 1,000 hours of videos of carpenters, but you don't have any of the chisels, any of the planes, any of the saws, any of the hammers, any of the nails, or any of the stuff that they've got, but you've been watching those videos. That does not make you a carpenter. What you have to do to become a carpenter is to go into the carpenter shop and watch them do it and put your hands on it and say, oh, can I hold this while you're sawing? Can I do this? Can I watch that? And pretty soon they'll put you to work. They'll say, yeah, go plane this piece of wood here for us, right? This is, in fact, the word for it that I'm talking about is apprentice. Now, I know that the word in recent times has been grandly abused on television, but the whole concept of apprentice is what we're talking about. And online courses cannot give that apprenticeship, can't give that lab, can't give that one-on-one contact. And this is where the Dhamma really is spread. It's spread one-on-one, one person at a time. That just recently I've had a number of students right here on my porch. And this is where some really interesting Dhamma can happen. It's just right here between two people. That's how I experienced it with Ajahn Po. He gave me so many lessons. Many of them were just spontaneous based upon the situation. But I was in lab with him. I was not in class with him. I was in lab with Ajahn Po. He didn't even hardly speak English in those days, and so there was no need for having a class with him. What I got was a lab, and that's what we need to set up in Western Buddhism, because right now we don't have any labs. All we've got is classrooms, and all the classrooms are filled with both students and teachers who are still at best at the apprentice level. And then there's no master to teach them. And yet the West is full of masters. The last time that I talked to Ajahn Reed in Seattle, he said that there were more than 200 Thai Watts now in the United States. Now, in order for a Watt to be a Watt, a real Watt, it has to have an abbot. And the abbot has to have been a monk for 20 years. So any abbot that you find, you're going to get some good lab from him. And these are the guys that we need to connect with. They would love to connect with the Westerners, but the Westerners don't come because of social problems, because of unfamiliarity, of fear, oh, I won't fit in, because basically most of these Watts and temples are cultural places also. The Thai people go to the Thai Wat so that they can cook Thai food, talk about Thailand, and speak in Thai language. And when the Westerner goes there, he feels out of place. The food is strange, the people are strange, the language is strange, but there's always people there who, because they live in the West, they do speak English. And so many of the monks would like to speak English. In fact, that's a really, really easy way to get into the Wat and spend time at the Wat, is to teach English to the monks. That they're in class and you're in lab. So um, when we look at it from the perspective of that lab versus class, the apprentice who's got to have his hands on. The first time that I ever gave a Dhamma talk, I was tricked into it. Achan Po had asked me to help Bhikkhu Buddhadasa with his English, and so the topic, little beknownst to me that this was part of the setup, was to talk on the Four Noble Truths. And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa made a few words, and then I translated to that, and I gave back to him to get the next part of it, and he says, no, you finish the talk. And here I am with maybe 50 Westerners and maybe 15 or 20 monks and Achan Po and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa and some other senior monks, and I was on the spot. And I got over that. That in fact I felt really, really lucky that they would pull a trick like that on me. And that was even before I was ordained. I wasn't even a monk yet when they had done that. So this is actually kind of like how it would happen that if a monk who speaks only a little bit of English has a meditation class in the English he's already doing, if he finds one of the students who knows quite a lot about the Dhamma, he will ask him to start teaching right then and there. That it really is all about practice. That no one learns to play a musical instrument without practice. Well, how do you learn to teach? You have to practice that. You can't get information about what you're going to teach in a class and then be expected to be able to teach it. You got to practice teaching, and the best way to practice teaching is like at a Winthrop University where you've got old senior teachers watching the student teacher teach. That's the best, is to have new teachers teaching for the first few times while they're being monitored. Well, we can actually start that up on Zoom. We can actually do that here. So in our teacher training program, that's one of the things that we would do, is have each teacher being assigned to have a talk and all of the other teachers listen. They will gain benefit, and the teacher will be the one who gains the most benefit. And so this was what we would be doing in a teacher training program when we add it to the Open Sangha Foundation as a broader perspective. Because also what we would want to do is to encourage teachers to stop looking for a huge number of students. For instance, some people will not give a lecture unless they've got 300 students in the class. Others say, well, if I don't have 50 students, then what's the point? But we would encourage them instead is to talk directly to just 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 students at a time. This is where we can get really good value out of it. And so we would encourage then to have a group of teachers that would say, yes, I'm on call. If you have students who want to find a teacher, let us have our blurb on the website so that the students can come in and choose a teacher and send him an email saying, hey, I have heard about you and I've seen you on this website. Can we connect with each other? And the teachers will then have a way on Skype or Discord or whatever like that to set up a meeting. And then that teacher will begin to grow a little Sangha of his students. And the students can have more than one teacher. And so it begins to network. But in the way that we have it in the West now, the teachers are actually jealous of one another, partly because of the competition of the Western mind state saying, oh, I've got more teachers, or I've got more students than you do. And the other side of it is that I wouldn't want him I wouldn't want this student to go to that teacher because I will lose something. And if there's money involved, that may actually be the case. The student will take his money and give it to that teacher rather than here. But when we stop looking at it from the perspective of money and start looking at it from the perspective of friendship, I mean, how many friends can you have? And if Judy is your friend, are you going to get angry at her because she's got a Susie friend? And Susie's your friend. So why would you let her be her friend? This is the mentality that we have in the West, but in the mentality of the Sangha, the more friends we have, the better. And by the way, thank you guys for being my friends. I like friends. And so this is what the Open Sangha Foundation is really all about. It's about the word Sangha. But in the context that we have it's not just the ordained Sangha, but rather that the ordained Sangha is kind of the umbrella for which all of the other Sangha of lay people. Because we're going to have, in the next few years, we're going to have literally tens of millions of people interested in the Buddha and interested in the Dhamma and don't have a clue about Sangha. And they're lost, they're stuck, they don't get anywhere because they don't have the friends. But if we can find a way of making friends, getting connections. So it would be quite possible that the guy who lives in this house right down the street is a guy who's really interested in the Dhamma. He reads the Dhamma, and the guys don't even know each other. But here on this thing, if you put in your address and your zip code, then that guy down there can be studying too, and he brings up this Google map and says, oh, look, I've got a Dhamma friend that's only 3-minute walking distance, and I didn't even know it. And so they're going to become friends, and now they can actually be friends in the real world without needing the internet anymore. And so there would be many, many different kinds of connections that could be made with people putting in their data so that we can all find ways for teachers to find other teachers, beginners to find other beginners, for beginners to find a teacher and become a student, for the students and the teachers to know each other, for some of the teachers to get into the Wat and begin to make connections with the Wat. Others move into the Wat and then become teachers. So we've got a wide variety of connections here, all in the sense of let's be friends in the Dhamma. Let's create that Sangha. Let's get that third noble or that third gem of the Buddha. Because just the classroom is not enough. We've got to have that lab. So, does anybody have any questions? You're on mute.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
There are so many, is what I said. There are so many. I like the idea of connection, the different levels of connection. So some of it is inevitably going to be online. Some of it is going to be personal. I like the ideas of apprenticeship, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I value that whole idea. We kind of lost it for a generation or two, but apprenticeship is important.
Mm-hmm. How can a psychotherapist become a good psychotherapist if they're not trained as a psychotherapist? When I was in group therapy, it was actually a training group, so that it would be basically who's the teacher and who's the science. You two come in front, and everybody else watches around while the old master sits there with his, I hear that. Okay, and doing that for a couple of years, really got me to start opening my eyes and looking at stuff that I had never seen before. And so this is the kind of situation that we need, is that apprenticeship, to be able to do it while, and not only that, but in the situation that I'm talking about here, looking at everybody in that group wound up being trained as a teacher, which meant that they had now 15 teachers as well as the old master. And we really, really, I mean, there was quite a community of us in that class of students, that we communicated outside, we dated each other. There was all kinds of interactions that were happening within that psychotherapy thing that I saw then and appreciated, but I didn't appreciate it the way that I do now.
Mm-hmm.
That it really is that apprenticeship, that we have to be trained to be a teacher. Otherwise, it may take years to develop the skills that can be developed in just a short time by watching and being corrected, and watching and being corrected. This is part of the reason also why a piano student needs a piano teacher. How many people do you know of? Very rarely. There's a few of them, and basically they did have a teacher anyway. I had a drummer who said, "Oh, I never had a teacher." And I said, "Did you watch videos of drummers? Slow it down to half speed and watch closely." And he said, "Yeah, I did that." And then I said, and then you went to the drum and you practiced that, and then you went back to the video, and then you came back to the drum, and he says, "Yeah." And he says, "That video was your teacher because you let it be." But most students are not going to be that way. Very, very few will do that. Another example is I was about to take a course in calculus at a university, and went and bought the book. And here I am reading the book, all interested in it, and I understand the first chapter. The second chapter is getting a little heavy, and by the third chapter, I'm lost. What happened? I wasn't doing the examples at the end of the chapter. If if I had done the examples at the end of chapter 1, I would have been ready for chapter 2. I thought I knew it by reading it. Nope, didn't get it by reading it. I had to do it. Okay, so this is how we train teachers, but this is in fact also how we get a beginner in Buddhism into being a real student, is because now the student is not just listening to, learning, and thinking about the Dhamma. Now he's actually doing it. What does that mean? He's actually in there changing his mind. He's actually in there saying, "That's an unwholesome thought. Let's change it to become a wholesome thought." And so that's part of the training that you'd get from a teacher, without them merely saying very much. And in fact, you probably know that being in a psychotherapeutic situation is the client will say something, the psychotherapist will adjust their posture, and that's all they do. And then the client will change their mind. They've rethought it because they didn't get the response from the therapist that they had hoped for. Okay, this is part of that apprenticeship. It's just having the teacher in the room with you is often enough to get you to rethink and re-look at and whatnot like that. And so this is why that Sangha portion is so valuable. Just being around other nobles makes it rub off. You can't help but behave yourself when you're around well-behaved people.
Yeah. And what about, I mean, Western, you talk about Western Buddhism, and I'm not even sure what that means, including for example, for the Open Sangha Foundation, whether that means traditional schools of Buddhism as opposed to a very open, well,
Okay,
may not be the word open, but
all right. Let us say it this way. that a big university, let us say one of them in California, can have an entire department of physics, an entire department of engineering of various kinds, nuclear and whatever, and yet it's all under one university, so you wouldn't really call it schools. Okay, so now let's go into Buddhism. Remember that we did have a talk, I think you were there, where we talked about there is only one Buddhism. So the various schools of Buddhism is part of the mentality of Western Buddhism.
Yeah.
That's something that can be worked on to break down, that there in fact are no various schools. We're all in the same big university of the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha. That's the big school. And that in there, in that school, the the soft scientist, the sociology professor can be great friends with a physics professor. All right.
Yeah.
So in that regard, we have actually a video that's going to be featured prominently on the website of Bhikkhu Buddhadasa being the teacher of and teaching Paticca Samuppada to the Dalai Lama.
Yes.
That should
Yes.
break down all of those school ideas. That in fact, Bhikkhu Buddhadasa was very into Zen, as well as many of the Zens have come. We've got several well-known Zen masters who came to stay at Wat Suan Mo. That not only did Dalai Lama come to Wat Suan Mo, but a huge number of Tibetan monks over the years have come through, stayed a long time, and then gone back to Dhammasala. So there is a lot of interaction. Here's something very interesting just on the side, and that is that in Vietnam, after the war, when the Westerners left, southern Vietnam was Theravada and northern was Mahayana. And the new communist government says we as a government are not going to make any distinctions at all between the two. And what that actually encouraged was a melding of it. That the biggest surprise of all was, and this happened in the Wat in Charlotte, North Carolina, a Vietnamese Wat had two monks there. There's actually more than two monks, but these two monks were surprisingly interesting because one of them had been ordained as Mahayana and wore the robes of Theravada. The other one was ordained Theravada and wore the robes of the Mahayana. Now that is an amazing point. They lived together. They saw no distinction. That in fact, Bhikkhu Bodhi lives in a Chinese Mahayana Wat in New Jersey. Okay? We need to stop thinking about all these various schools and look at it in the sense that there's really only two tiers. Those who don't understand the Dhamma and think what they believe is Dhamma, and those who actually know the teachings of the Buddha and apply them. Those are the two groups. And there are all kinds of superstitious beliefs that are called Buddhism, and that the real teaching of the Dhamma, sometimes it's hard for those people to give up their superstitious beliefs in order to take on the real teaching of the Buddha. A clear example of that, by the way, and an easy one to understand, is many people are under the magical delusion that the world is out to get them. If they have that idea too heavily, they're called paranoid. Okay? But there is also the idea of a metanoid that the world is out to do them good. And that would be the change then. But the point in reality is the world is just out there and it's not interested in me. I don't need, in fact, for God, the universe, or all of that that's out there, or anybody in it to love me. What I need to do is to learn to love myself. And in that, to come out of the position that the world is out there against me. That I am not the victim of the world. I'm the champion of my own life. Now that's the basic change from that lower position of ordinary people who think that they've got to have a job and they've got to do what they're told to do, and they just got to suffer along and then they die. Whether they're Christian or atheist or whatever like that, this is the level of ordinary people. Even the very wealthy are like that, because ever how much money they have is not enough. Now, isn't that magical thinking? That's real delusion, that $100 million is not enough. Ever how much money we have, it's not enough. That's delusional thinking. If we would have the correct thinking of, I've got enough already. I've got enough already. I'm good enough. And that's the noble. So the ignoble is not enough, and the noble is enough. And people have to make that change. This is actually the real teaching of the Buddha, and many people mistake all kinds of things about what the Buddha teaches, which are not part of Buddhism at all, but they have been kind of left around. The analogy that I would use is, imagine that there's a small shrine that is well known to be the shrine, but it only has a small door, and only one person can go in at a time, and they can't take their baggage with them. So they have to leave the baggage outside the shrine. And over the years, people have been going into the shrine one at a time, taking all their baggage off, and the baggage has been building up around the shrine. So that now modern people have to climb over a mountain of baggage just to get to the door of the shrine, and then they have to take their baggage off too. All right? So in that regard, we mistake the baggage for the actual shrine. And the baggage then is all that we've heard about the teachings of the Buddha, in the sense of rebirth and reincarnation and magical powers and all of that kind of stuff that we've got no evidence for at all. And if we cling to those things, we can't fit into the door. Because why? Because to get in the door, we have to drop all of our magical thinking and begin to live in reality instead. And the reality in that regard is we don't know. There is so much stuff we don't know. Imagine that there was a group of professors in a room. Let us say the dean had a party, and all of the professors are in that room. There is not one person in that room that knows everything that everybody else knows. Every one of them is unique in that they only have a small part. The Buddha gave that example with the elephant. 10 blind men inspect an elephant. One inspects his trunk, another inspects his leg, another with the ear, another with the tail. And then later they all give a different description of the elephant. Okay? We can take that in the sense of you've got to really explore in order to find out that this is an elephant. But it's also the point that there is no end to that elephant. There's no end to human knowledge. There's no end even beyond the human knowledge. There's still no end to it. And yet here we are, we want to know, we want to know, we want to know. It's greed for learning. And so once we learn something, we cling to it. We want it. An example of that is people who would vote for one politician and then vote for him again, and now he loses next time, and they feel bad. Why? Because they identify with that politician. I voted for him. He is me. If he loses this election, I lose too. But if I'm not identified with that politician, then when he loses, it's the politician that loses. I haven't lost a thing. Okay, so that identity is delusional. And we wind up feeling bad because we identify with all kinds of things that we don't need to identify to. But if everybody around us also identifies like that, let us say the entire neighborhood is all Republican and they're all for Donald Trump, then they will support each other in their views. But if one of them moves into a blue neighborhood, he'll get his eyes opened a little bit and begins to look around, but he doesn't want to. because he wants to hold and cling to his old knowledge. And so this is part of the reason why Sangha is so valuable, that guys can sit there and read a book and read it again and read it again, and they're not learning very much out of the book because they already think that they know it. Gloria Steinem, a very famous feminist, took a quote from Jesus and turned it around. When Jesus said, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free, but first it'll really piss you off." Well, that's the state of ordinary people who begin to Buddhism. They won't like some of the stuff that's in the teaching of the Buddha, even though that it's real. Why do they not like it? Is because it doesn't fit with what they already believe is to be true. And so if we can now start an organization that allows people to interact with other people, so that some of these rough edges can be honed off, so that people can begin to understand that you can be happy. You don't have to be miserable. Just because you've been miserable, that doesn't mean that it's your destiny to be miserable. You can be happy. Practice well. Just because you've never been a violin player doesn't mean that you'll never be a violin player. It just means you'll never be a violin player until you practice the violin. And when you practice the violin, you'll become a violin player. Well, if you're a miserable person, if you practice being happy, you can wind up being a happy person. But every time that we forget, we go back into the misery. That's why we have to keep practicing and keep practicing. And this is also why we need to be around noble friends to invite us. Just by their smile would be enough to invite us to not be so miserable, and to start being happy. So this is what we need for the Sangha, is to happy people, to vibrate happily for the world. And the more people we have vibrating happily, the less problems this world is going to have. And we've got an amazing opportunity coming up with the internet, as well as all this AI, that in fact, I would imagine that eventually we will have AI Dhamma teachers who are superb Dhamma teachers, because they have, the AI has been trained by superb Dhamma teachers. By taking a whole bunch of videos of Ajahn Amaro and put them through the AI, and now you've got an Ajahn Amaro right there in front of you. And if we can somehow program in not just the didactic or the classroom, but to program into the AI the lab, that would be when, but we're nowhere near there, not yet. So for quite a while, we're going to have human teachers. Let's hope that we can train some good ones so that the world gets great benefit out of the Dhamma. Anna, you have anything to say? No, not a thing. All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's the second time that I've heard you say this is not about schools of Buddhism. And I think I needed to hear it a second time, because actually I completely agree with you. There is only the Dharma. And there's what we've done to it and what different cultures have done to it. But so, yeah, thank you for saying it a second time, because as
I
I said,
would
for whatever
say,
reason, I needed it a second time.
all right, I would say that in fact, when Buddhism comes into a culture, and it really comes in, it's almost, I mean, in the real teaching of the Buddha comes into a culture, it's almost like an automobile wreck.
Right.
And the Dhamma itself comes out unscathed, but the culture has a major change. And so the Dhamma coming into Tibetan culture has had a major change on the Tibetan culture. Also on the Thai culture. I wonder what Thailand would be like if Buddhism never came here. Indonesia is the same way. A lot of Buddhism in Indonesia. But it also has to do with the fact that Western Buddhism is still fragile. And so when it crashes into Western culture, it too gets modified and becomes more culture than it is Buddhism. And it's going to be our job, as well as everyone who can see the job, is to start to change that around. Let's take, for instance, take the money out of the Dhamma. Let's put friendship back in. Let's stop with this division and sectarianism and otherisms and recognize that we're all humans, all in the same boat. We all have magical thinking that I'm not good enough and I've got to work really hard and my life is tough. Into my life's a breeze. I'm having a ball here. And it's all a matter of change of attitude. And that's the basic core of the teaching of the Buddha, which is stated in the Buddha's own language of dukkha, dissatisfaction in life, into dukkha nirodha. Let's take the dissatisfaction out and become satisfied with our lives. What a planet Earth this would be if all the humans were happy and satisfied. How many coal mines would we be digging if we were all happy and satisfied? So that's the way, is to bring some satisfaction into the minds of all of those people who are looking for a way out when things get really tough. And things are going to get tough. It's going to be really good for a lot of people. They're going to really enjoy the benefits of AI. But I mean, how many AI, or let us say robot servants, do you need to clean your house and fix your food, and you're still sitting at home alone, miserable? So we need to find a way for those people, instead of trying to find a way of AI fixing up their life. Another way to do it is to go find some friends, some noble friends, some friends who are going to help you, to give you good advice, to give you the opportunity to really look at our own foibles and recognize that that's why I'm suffering. It's not because of anything out there. It's not the world that's against me. It's that I've learned that when it wasn't true. That when I was a kid, I thought the world was against me because I got punished for this, that, and the other thing. But now I haven't been punished like that in many years. Why do I keep clinging to the punishments that I got when I was a child? I can be happy now. I can giggle in class now. In the old days when I giggled in class, I got a spanking. Now I can giggle in class happily. So this is the way we could have a whole human race this way. Now, I know that this is grandiose, and it's certainly not going to be happening in any of our lifetimes, but we can start it out by getting that community going, so the beginners can help students, and students can help the beginners, and vice versa with the teachers, so the teachers can help the teachers. The teachers, in fact, and those others who want to be teachers can start moving into the watts, because the watts are there. We don't have to build any more watts. We don't need any more meditation retreat centers. We've already got enough of those. And we have all of these other places that are going completely unused. And all of these watts were built for the future, thinking that this is what's going to happen. So we're going to facilitate all of this community and interaction, hoping that many people will gain great benefit from this. And everybody's happy. So, why don't we finish now? Does anybody, Anna, do you have something to say? Not a thing, huh? All right.
I'm going to say, Anna, I'm going to say it a second time. It's really good to be online with you. So I'm really pleased that we're here together.
Yes, you guys can. We're going to get somehow or another. We're going to get a women's group going.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Anna and I are already chatting, typing messages to each other. So it's
It's a
already happening.
different Anna, Susan. It's a different Anna. It's not me.
No, I know that. I know that there's actually I'm contacting
Other
three
Anna
Annas.
fighting. Yes, it's not me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just looking what you're talking about. I'm not in it.
No. I know that. I know that. Yeah.
Guys, thank you so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you.
See ya. Bye.
Bye bye.